Pnawn da a croeso. Good afternoon and welcome to the Welsh Strategic Dairy Farm webinar, Healthy Calves, Healthy Profit. I'm Tegan Taylor and I'm the Knowledge Exchange Senior Manager for the Welsh Dairy team. I have a few other people joining me today. I would like to introduce Nick Parsons, the Head of Dairy Development for AHDB, John and Anna Booth, Rhual Dairy Owners, and Dr. Robert Hyde from Nottingham University. The agenda for today is we're going to go through an update from Nick Parsons from AHDB around the Strategic Dairy Farm project, and then we will go into an update from Rhual and an overview of the farm, and then we will then go into the technical aspect of the webinar. A little bit of general housekeeping. If you'd like to ask a question, please click on the arrow and it will open up your question box. All questions are anonymous. I will now pass over to Nick Parsons, who will give us a Strategic Dairy Farm update.
Thanks, Tegan. And yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm especially pleased to be involved as Head of Dairy Development with AHDB in this particular webinar, because as you'll find out from Bobby later, the inception of this, the setting up of this was part of my previous role and putting farmers forward for this. So it's great to be involved in the finishing and highlighting of some of the findings from this. And John and Anna Booth were one of the farms that came forward out of that group. So great to be involved. Thanks, Tegan. If you'd like to flip forward. So I just want to give a quick update of where we are with the strategic dairy farms. So as part of that wider farm excellence platform, the 16 that we now have strategic dairy farms stretching from Scotland through Wales and the rest of England, and finding farmers to develop that group. The farmers are a cross section of what we call our optimal dairy systems. So looking at the two different approaches, whether it be a block calving farm, spring or autumn, or all year round calving farms, and good representation of those across the country, all the systems, but also looking for people who are doing the job in an excellent way, and being able to use those as key examples. Clearly, COVID has got in the way of us being able to deliver physical meetings, and the target has always been for 3 physical meetings a year on farm. But we've moved to this webinar situation, and it's proving to be very popular. So very pleased, and I think looking forward, we'll look to continue as we come out of COVID. We'll look to continue to have some kind of digital presence, maybe hybrid meetings where we're using both live meetings, but also a digital delivery as well. So look forward to those. With regards to recruitment, we've got a further 8 farms that are coming through. They're the White Stars. One of those has already been launched, Garner and Wade in Leicestershire. The others are coming through the audit process and have dates in the autumn to be launched. But we're also looking to recruit, especially in Wales. So for those who are listening today in Wales, if you're down in South Wales, we're looking for farms down there, as well as potentially in Mid Wales as well. So if you're interested, speak to your knowledge exchange manager over there, and they will highlight what's involved. Thanks, Tegan. So as part of the work that we've been doing, we've been rebuilding and developing the website. So this is Adrian Bland. He's up in Cumbria, South Cumbria. And what we try and do is for each of the strategic farms, 16 at the moment, we've got a page for each of those, and we put on the links that are relevant to the farm, reasons to follow that farm, reasons to watch. Now, Adrian's an autumn block carver, so we put reasons that may be of interest to follow the journey that Adrian started with that. So the idea is to give you an insight if you can't get to the farm and you haven't caught the webinars, give you an insight and a way through. So that's on the AHDB website. So I'd encourage you to go and take a look at that. Thanks, Tegan. I just wanted to highlight, this is a bit of breaking news really, not as significant as the news from the government today, but I think for the dairy industry this is a fantastic opportunity for people who maybe haven't engaged with benchmarking up to now. A major part of what we talk about is key performance indicators with the strategic dairy farms, and benchmarking is a key part to HDB's view of how we can help farmers to start that journey of improving productivity and performance, is to measure yourselves against others. Now, all on the strategic dairy farms on the website, they'll have shared their KPIs, and you can measure against those. But you can come into what will be from next week the KPI Express calculator. It will give you all 9 of the optimal dairy systems KPIs to measure yourself again. But the beauty of this calculator is that you can just look at one. So you can start off at a reasonably easy level and put in your details. 2 or 3 points of detail data will be enough. And you can start that benchmarking journey and start to measure against the group that we have within the system now, but also then look across to the strategic dairy farms that are relevant to your situation, your system that you run, and compare yourself also to those. So that we've launched it softly last week. Now that means we've put it out to a small group of people just to finalize the testing. But from next week, middle of next week, on the links, on the tiles, as they call them, on the dairy part of the AHDB website, the calculator will be clear to find. And I urge you to consider going in, having a look. Very simple, register with it, and then very much start that benchmarking journey. So thanks to all, and I hope you enjoy the webinar today. I'll pass back to Tegan.
Thank you very much, Nick. That's brilliant. We're going to move on now to a bit of an introduction of Rhual. If you have not been to the farm before or caught up with their journey so far in the Strategic Dairy Farm project, we have a video now to show you a little bit about the farm.
My name's John Boo, my wife Anna. We farm here at the Rhual. We farm 550 acres. We've got 330 milking cows, and we produce about 8,500 litres per cow per year. Our aim is to improve our yields to over 9,000 litres profitably and increase our yield from forage. We felt very pleased to be asked to be a strategic dairy farm. We've always been very keen on our discussion group, and we felt we learned an enormous amount from other farmers. So becoming a strategic farm has allowed us to get more advice and input from other farmers who, in fairness, give you very practical advice, and in the right environment will tell you exactly what they think, which to my mind is incredibly useful to any business. Hopefully other farmers will also gain from coming here, not necessarily from what we do, but from the ideas that other farmers bring, and we'll see what improvements we can make from these meetings, and then they might take that home as well.
Yeah, it was really pleasing to see so many people here and to have so many ideas how to go forward. So yeah, very pleased.
The key things we're going to focus on over the next couple of years is to improve our dry cow transition management. We've put up a new shed which has become operational in the last couple of days, and with improvements to ration as well, we're hoping to see a vast improvement in herd health, and hopefully this will lead to increased yield and also a reduction in antibiotic use, which is another one of our aims. Grazing wise, we want to take on board advice given to make better use of our grazing platform, and that's going to be a work in progress over the next couple of years.
So that's a little bit of an introduction into Rhual and why they joined the Strategic Dairy Farm project. Now I'd just like to ask John and Anna to give us a little update on where they are in the current production season.
Hello, welcome everyone. We're currently milking about 291 in milk as of today. They're averaging about 27.5 litres a day. We're still out day and night, everything. We haven't kept anything in yet. They're fed a buffer to come into each milking. Fertility has been good all summer. We've got a preg rate of 38%. We think that's really due to the better tri-cow transition management since we put the shed up last autumn. We have 2 full-time members of staff. Aled recently went on an AI course. He's been with us for some time now, and Andy has just started with us this month, and so we're back up to full strength, and hopefully everyone's pulling well in the right direction. Going forward for the winter, we've got probably just enough grass in the clamp, but a bit short on bales for young stock, so we've got a 4th cut to do. Maize is looking excellent. Obviously that's still to come in, and we're not short of grass out there yet. Grass is still growing quite well with us, so we'll keep them out as long as possible for the winter. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. I'll now like to pass over to Dr. Robert Hyde, and we'll start into the technical aspect of the webinar.
Thanks, Tegan. Thanks for the introduction. We'll start off by looking at kind of what calves on dairy farms are faced with. So based on research studies, there's about 1 in 5 calves won't receive enough immunity from their colostrum. About 1 in 2 will experience scours during the pre-weaning period. 1 in 2 will experience some sort of respiratory disease, pneumonia, and 1 in 20 die before weaning. So, you know, there's quite a lot going on here. And we know that it's quite easy for young stock to slip a little bit down the list, maybe, of things to do on a busy dairy farm. So it kind of raises the question, are we doing enough to maximise the health, welfare and profitability of calves on our dairy farms? So we know that perhaps we could do a little bit more to improve health and welfare of calves. What we don't have a good idea of is what factors are important that result in happy and healthy calves. So you'll hear from lots of various different people that it's maybe the environment. If we could go on to the next slide, the environment or the drainage or outlet ventilation or the inlet ventilation or quality of feed or water that we put in front of them. But really, we don't have a very good scientific knowledge base to say specifically which of these areas are going to be the most important areas to focus on, given that most dairy farms don't have unlimited time or money to focus on hundreds of different areas all at once. So with all that in mind, we've been conducting some research at the University of Nottingham that's been funded by AHDB to help try and answer some of these questions. So at the start of the study, we recruited 60 dairy farms across the country, and we visited each one of these farms to get a really detailed understanding of how they manage their calves. So we know what kind of area the cow calves into, how much it's bedded, what kind of colostrum the calf gets, what kind of housing it goes into, and for each calf or calving building, we've taken over 100 measurements per building, including the widths, the heights, the inlet, the outlet areas, just as a few examples, really. And we've also placed data loggers in each building the calf might enter to record the temperature and humidity of each building on the trial every 10 minutes over 6 months. We've got some really detailed information for each calf building. We've got birth weights from over 5,000 calves, and farmers were asked to record weaning weights, diseases and deaths. And we've also performed colostrum bacteriology testing and calf blood testing, so we can assess colostrum quality and immune transfer to calves. And the idea of the trial as a whole is to examine all of the hundreds or thousands of building and management factors that might differ between farms and analyse what effect these might have on calf health and performance, so we can pick out and identify what are the most important factors to focus on if you're going to try and improve calf performance on the majority of farms. We're also really interested in calf mortality, and we thought it was first quite important to calculate the mortality rates of calves in Britain using BCMS data, which is something that's not really been done before. So for this part of the study, we used BCMS data for the whole of Britain and looked at all births and deaths over most of the past decade, which included over 20 million cattle deaths. And we knew where each of these animals would die, and as you might expect, quite a lot of these deaths were at slaughterhouse, but actually over 3 million deaths over that time period occurred on farm, and almost 1 million calf deaths occurring between 0 and 3 months, which suggests that about 25% of all on-farm deaths happen around the pre-weaning period. I don't know if there's any questions at this point, Tegan.
No questions yet, Robert, so we'll continue.
Okay. So we've looked at loads of housing and management factors, and there's actually more than 1,000 factors we've examined for each farm. So to start with one area, we'll look at housing, and John and Anna have really kindly offered to give us a bit of a virtual tour of their farm building. So I'll hand over to John and Anna to discuss what the calf buildings on your farm are like.
On milk up to about to weaning age at about 10 weeks old. The calves initially come from the cow and straight into these pens of groups of 2 and 3s. They stay in here for a maximum of 4 weeks, but we try to get them moved on in about 3 weeks' time into the bigger groups of 5, 6s, and sometimes 8, depending on the shed size. We rear them on just straw and cake. These are weaned calves, about 16 weeks old, and they will generally come into here and stay the winter, and then move into cubicles when they're in their second season.
That's great. Thanks, John. So people always want to know from any kind of calf project what is the very best housing, and I think from the outset it's really important to kind of realise that actually it's much more important how that calf housing is managed rather than the type of housing that you might have. So there'll be lots of debates, for example, whether hutches are good or bad. And on this calf project, we've definitely seen some really brilliantly run calf hutch systems on the trial. Clean concrete pads, deep clean straw, regularly cleaned, and as you can imagine, calves do much better with that kind of management system than perhaps some of the hutch systems that are on an earth floor, have maybe some dirty bedding, and are much more rarely cleaned out, as you can see in the pictures here. So it's much more important, I think, how that hutch is managed than whether it's a hutch or not. People talk as well about fan ventilation, and when it's done properly, it means fresh air is sucked into the building and distributed through plastic tubes to ensure that clean air is kind of present throughout the whole building and the risk of pneumonia is limited. But just having a fan in a building clearly doesn't mean that ventilation is perfect, and actually just blasting air at animals doesn't really count as ventilation. So the overall management of the calves is probably going to have a far bigger impact on the calves than your specific building design. This trial has looked at lots of quite relatively poor sheds, but actually plenty of clean straw bedding is used and a really high standard of calf care in place. And we have some really healthy and productive calves, even if the calf building isn't quite the palace that we really want it to be. So regardless of how kind of fancy a shed you've got, if you don't clean it and regularly and provide clean bedding, the calves are really never going to do very well. So we'll have a bit of a closer look at some of the BCMS calf mortality data. So looking at all of the calf deaths across the whole country for about 10 years and see what kind of trends we can see. So firstly, there's a really clear effect of breed type, as you can see on the graph on the left here, showing that dairy calves have much higher mortality rates than the beef calves that's shown on the right. So is this because beef calves are just a bit tougher, or is it maybe something to do with kind of how we manage these animals, meaning they maybe get slightly better nutrition and perhaps slightly less challenge from disease? There also seems to be an effect of sex for both dairy and beef calves, with male calves having far higher mortality rates on farm. And remember, this doesn't include any slaughtered or euthanized calves, it's on farm deaths only. And again, is this because females are just a bit tougher, or is it perhaps something with how we manage our calves, and particularly dairy bull calves, that means actually they're at slightly higher risk of dying on farm? So again, it kind of seems that actually the management system probably plays quite a big role in mortality rates, at least at a national level. So some pretty clear patterns with the month of birth, so fewer calves die in the summer than the winter on average, and we probably could have guessed that. But when we paired this up with the Met Office temperature data for the whole country, we actually also found an independent effect of temperature, which means there's both an effect of month and temperature. So for example, of all the Januaries, more calves would die when January was colder than when it was warm. And this part of the study really is kind of a rough overview across the country, but already we can see some quite strong patterns in the mortality rates, and it seems to be primarily influenced by the management system and the environmental conditions. So if you'd like to give this research a bit of a further look, you can have a look at our Herd Health Toolkit app. You can enter kind of some details for your farm and see what the mortality rate might be for some given conditions. So you can enter the month, the sex, the breed, and various different estimates, and have a play around with different monthly temperatures that you might experience on your farm, and see what kind of effect even just a few degrees might have on calf mortality. So if you just put in a search for the Nottingham Herd Health Toolkit, you should be able to find that. So that's all well and good, but you can't do very much about environmental temperature, and we can't really change the weather. So to dig a little bit deeper into this area, we put data loggers into all of the calf buildings on our trial. So eventually we collected, several million data points of the calf buildings and information from about 100 calf buildings. This graph shows the average temperature inside the calf buildings compared with the average temperature outside calf buildings over time. And even just from a quick glance, you can see that the lines are actually pretty much the same. And this is quite an important finding from the study, and shows that really on the whole, the temperature inside calf buildings is almost exactly the same as whatever the outside temperature is. And there's really no effect of building type on the shed temperature. So whilst for adult cow housing, people talk about the stack effect and heat from cattle warming the air and driving the ventilation up and out of the building, it's pretty clear from this part of the study that calves really don't kick out enough energy to heat the buildings they're in at all. So it's really important to note here the thermoneutral zone. As you can see, if we go back one, Tegan, you can see there's a line on the graph showing the kind of thermoneutral zone, which is about 15 degrees Celsius. And really, if they're below kind of 12 to 15 degrees Celsius, they will be just burning energy, staying warm when they're in the first few weeks of life. And you can see from this graph, actually, that the inside of the calf buildings, it really doesn't reach an average temperature of 15 degrees until around June time. So we know from our mortality study that low temperatures means more calf deaths. And we know we can't change the weather, but perhaps we need to look at some methods of how we keep our calves warm, not just for a few weeks in the very cold depths of December, but actually probably most of the year round. And the easiest way to check on your farm specifically is to monitor the temperature of your shed. And it's really quite easy to do. Just a very cheap minimum maximum thermometer, which will cost you less than £10. Really gives you an idea of how warm or cold that calf building gets each day or each night. So we analysed a couple of buildings with John and Anna, and found really similar results actually that we've seen previously. So the inside of both the buildings we looked at with John and Anna are really very similar to the outside building the entire year round. Whether that's the kind of the younger calf pens, which are made of sheet metal, or there's some slightly older pre-weaning calf pens, which are made of kind of thick stone walls. And these buildings were quite different in terms of height and design, but as you can see, actually really only kind of 1 or 2 degrees different in terms of temperature. So to summarise what we can do practically to try and make this calf housing work for us as best as it can, it's definitely much more important how you manage the shed as much as its design. If we can flick on a slide. It's much more important to keep the calves warm, and it's not just over winter, but over most of the year. We really can't change the weather, but we can provide them a much warmer immediate environment. So one area everyone can improve on literally right today is bedding. And yes, straw is quite expensive and there's not always an unlimited supply, but compared with the cost of calf mortality, it's really quite a cheap investment. The straw really needs to be clean and dry, and there needs to be absolutely loads of it. And as a general rule, you really shouldn't be able to see the calf's legs at all when the calf's lying down. So if you're questioning whether you've got enough clean and dry bedding in the pen, then you probably don't have enough. If you can't bed to that high level across the whole pen, then you could consider just providing one area that's really deeply bedded. So perhaps just for the back half of the shed, you have an incredibly deep dry straw bed. And then at the front, you maybe have a bare concrete area, which also allows that area to be cleaned out much more easily. We know how important temperature is for calves, and whilst we can't change the climate, having wet or dirty bedding really loses those calves a lot of heat. And if you can provide them with deep bedding, then they're really able to nestle down into that nice deep bed and avoid losing any precious heat through wet or dirty bedding. Having adequate ventilation is really important in the prevention of pneumonia, but it definitely doesn't mean just blowing a gale at the calves. And generally speaking, if you're at calf level and you can feel kind of a breeze on your face, then it's probably too much for the calves. So a nice, easy way to give the calves the best environment is to give them a bit of choice. So you can easily create kind of micro environments within the buildings using straw bales, plywood roofs, over the backs of pens, and just watch what the calves do. And if they're always kind of hiding and tucking themselves away underneath a shelter or behind a straw bale, then they probably are too cold. And just by observing where those calves tend to go, you can get a really good idea of where you need to make some improvements. But by that same kind of token, if calves really love a particular area and they spend a lot of time there, of course they will create a lot more muck in that area, and that area might need to be cleaned out a bit more frequently. There's a lot of interest in increasing temperatures via the kind of heat lamps or jackets, and there isn't a great deal of scientific evidence to back up either. Heat lamps are very cheap to run, and they don't heat the environment, but they do kind of warm whatever's directly underneath them, and can be quite effective actually in terms of young calves. Just be very careful if you are using heat lamps that they're definitely not going to be kicked into the straw, because there's quite a clear fire risk here. Jackets are quite commonly used, but if you don't keep those jackets clean and dry, then really they're probably worse than not doing anything at all if they do get kind of wet and dirty. So overall, we've got to recognise that calves generally in the UK are going to be in an environment that's colder than we'd like for quite a lot of the year. We can't really change the weather, so we've got to try and reduce that heat loss by providing loads and loads of clean, dry bedding, avoiding kind of direct draws onto the calves, and creating little areas where those calves can be quite warm. All of this, of course, needs to be done whilst allowing that building to be cleaned out regularly. And as a general rule, calving pens should be cleaned out about every 3 weeks, and calf pens at least once a month, as we'll come on to later on. And there's tons of information on the specifics of kind of housing design, which we can't really delve into in just a few minutes on housing. But the AHDB Better Housing Guide is a really great place to go to look for, with a bit more building related information.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bobby. We do have quite a few questions that have come in. The first question is for you, Robert. So what's the best place to place a temperature gauge? What sort of height, where in the building, etc.?
Yeah, really good question. And we had the same problem when we were putting our data loggers into the 100 calf buildings. And essentially, you want to put it as close to where the calves are going to be spending most of their time. So ideally, kind of at calf level when they're lying down. The problem is, of course, calves being quite inquisitive will absolutely destroy anything that you put at calf level. So putting it about chest height is probably okay and kind of is just out of their reach. If you can put it kind of just out of the pen so they can't grab it and destroy your shiny new thermometer, then all the better, and just put it kind of, around about calf height would be absolutely fine. It's never going to be a really precise measurement of the temperature in your building, but it does give you a kind of very rough idea of how cold did it get overnight. Do we need to consider putting in a bit more bedding, and kind of making sure the calves can stay a bit more warm over winter.
Perfect. That leads nicely on to the next question, is around when you are using a thermometer, do you look at the minimum or maximum average, as during the evening and the days we're getting quite extreme temperature differences?
Definitely, yeah, and that's a really, really important point, and something we didn't really go into here too much, but you can get very hot temperatures during the day, so we do have to be a bit cautious of that. Most buildings with calves, we don't have to worry too much about the upper temperatures in the UK for most of the year, although there are weeks where you will have to worry about that. And generally speaking, it's the lower end where they tend to suffer, and they usually tend to be warm. I would look at both. You know, I don't think there's a reason to look at one or the other. I think, you know, during the winter months, obviously they're never going to be too warm. During the kind of summer months, there will be times when they're too warm, and you can start to look at the maximum or the average upper temperatures as well, and start to open things up a little bit more. But really, calf building, it needs to be flexible, and you need to really work depending on the conditions that are prevailing on the day, really.
Brilliant, thank you. There's another question here just asking if, as part of the research, did you only look at straw bedding, or were other things looked at like sawdust and wood chip?
We would have looked at that at sawdust and wood chip. Actually, we didn't have any calves on sawdust or wood chip, so we couldn't pull out from this study anyway whether one would be better or worse than the other, really. So that was just the nature of the farms that we had on the trial, really. Yeah, I mean, instinctively, I think as long as they're very clean and very dry, you possibly could get away with sawdust, or you know, calves could probably do quite well in them. And the downside, of course, is they probably don't have as much nesting ability, and perhaps can't get themselves wiggled down and quite as cozy. But yeah, from this research, we really couldn't tell which one would be better for the calves, really, at this point.
Brilliant. Okay, we'll move on. I can see the questions are still coming in, so please don't worry. We will keep answering questions as we go along.
Okay, so going on to colostrum. So we all know colostrum is incredibly important for calves, and a lot of people will have heard the 3 Qs of colostrum management. So feeding colostrum quickly, of good quantity, and of good quality as well. So we'll go into a bit more detail on those, but we'll start off with a little bit of an overview, if that's all right, John and Anna, on kind of your current colostrum management protocol. So if I can hand over to you, John and Anna.
Yeah, we when a cow calves, if it's a risk from trying to think of the name of it, Ionis or Neospora, we don't let the calves have their colostrum. So we obviously, on good cows, we take colostrum from them. Now we put them through a fractometer, and the best colostrum we then freeze and keep in stock for any of these cows that calve that we want to use it for, plus also to use if it's the middle of the night and we don't want to milk the cow. But we do find it important to test the colostrum to make sure that we've got the best stuff in stock. The cow comes into the parlour, we wash the cow as we normally would in the parlour with the brushes, and then we milk it into a sterile dump bucket. That then goes straight out into a bucket in the dairy, which is stored for Anna then to test and to use accordingly. And that's as far as we do, really.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, John. So looking into colostrum in a bit more detail then. So we've heard lots of times colostrum is really important. And what's really important to realise, I think, is when that calf is born, it has absolutely zero immunity against disease, and that's absolutely nothing at all. So every bit of its immunity comes from that colostrum, and if it doesn't get it, then the calf's at greater risk of disease or death. So the 3 Qs of colostrum, as we've kind of mentioned already, is a really neat way of remembering what those most important factors are when considering your colostrum feeding. So colostrum needs to be fed quickly, which is really as soon as is possible, whilst realising, you know, everyone's got to sleep at some point. No one should be getting up in the middle of the night. So always within 6 hours is quite a good cut-off, really. The quantity is also vital, and generally speaking, kind of about 3 to 4 litres within that first feed is enough colostrum, even if the quality isn't that good. Which brings us to that final Q, quality. So that really encompasses two things. That's the concentration of immunity and the cleanliness of the colostrum, as we'll come on to. So not getting these things perfect doesn't guarantee that every single calf's going to die, but it does make bad things a lot more likely. And we know from a lot of research that calves failing to get a good immune transfer from their colostrum are 1.5 times more likely to get scour, 1.8 times more likely to get pneumonia, and twice as likely to die. So in other words, if you don't get your colostrum right, twice as many calves will die than if you do get your colostrum right. So quantity and quickly are quite easy to solve. It's really important to feed that colostrum as soon as you can, and delaying that feeding even by a few hours massively reduces the amount of immunity that that calf can absorb. So if you can get 3 to 4 litres into every calf within 6 hours of birth, then really you're probably doing about as well as you can in those areas. Quality, however, has a few components, but luckily they are all quite easy to monitor. So if you don't have one already, I'd really urge you to consider investing in a Brix refractometer, as John's mentioned already. So this tool really allows you to monitor the immunity levels in colostrum, and it also allows you to test how much immunity has been transferred to that calf's blood. It only costs about £20, so really cheap, and really, every single dairy should have one. You just put a drop of colostrum onto that refractometer and check what level of immunity that colostrum contains. So as part of our trial, we tested several areas of colostrum quality. Firstly, we tested the immune levels of colostrum. And from this trial, actually, we found that about 1 in 3 samples we tested was of low immunity levels. Changing immunity levels in colostrum is quite hard to do, but knowing that you have a lower immunity concentration in your colostrum might mean that you can choose to feed a larger volume at certain times. So the calf basically needs a certain amount of immunity in its blood, and if we know that that concentration of immunity is a little bit lower, then we can just feed a little bit more of it to make up. We also tested colostrum for bacteria levels, and again, we found 1 in 3 samples we tested was too high for bacteria levels. And this is really important for 2 reasons. So firstly, bacteria in colostrum could easily cause scour themselves, and with some of the samples that we had, calves would literally be receiving billions of dangerous bacteria in that very first meal when they have no immunity at all. Secondly, there's good evidence now that actually the more bacteria there are in colostrum, the less immunity that calf can absorb. And that's probably because the bacteria tend to bind up all that immunity that's in the colostrum, and that means that the calf can't absorb it. So one of the most important tests you can really do on your farm is test the end result. So by blood testing calves under 1 week of age, you can tell really whether that calf has had enough immunity or not. And if not, then we can do something about it. In our study, there was about 1 to 2 calves in every 10 failed to get enough immunity from their colostrum, and that meant that they were at an increased risk of disease. So each of our 60 farms in our trial returned 6 colostrum samples, and we analysed what these farms were doing in order to result in kind of clean colostrum. This graph shows the bacteria levels for the 6 samples from each different farm, and you can see actually for all of the farms there's quite a lot of variation. And there's plenty of farms that manage to get 0 contamination or 0 bacteria in all of their samples, as you can see on kind of the bottom left. But there were quite a lot of farms actually that really struggled to get colostrum collected quickly. And really over 1/3 of the samples were kind of classified as dirty and too dirty really to feed. Compared with other farms on the trial, John and Anna have done really nicely. You can see the small blue dot on the bottom left here, really, really low bacteria levels in all of the samples that they return. So there's probably not a great deal actually for us to change in terms of colostrum collection protocol with John and Anna. So what are kind of people such as John and Anna doing to keep their colostrum so clean when they collect it? Well, we know that when the colostrum comes out of a cow, it's got extremely low bacteria levels. And really, it's the equipment that we use to collect colostrum that's going to be the source of contamination. So around half of the farms on our trial were cleaning colostrum with cold water. If we can flick onto that, that's it, thank you. So half of the farms on our trial were cleaning colostrum collection equipment with cold water. You can see on this graph on the left, actually the cold water cleaning made high bacteria counts much more likely. So a really good idea is to use scalding hot water to clean your dump buckets and any colostrum feeding equipment every time you use them. Similarly, this graph on the right here, what you use to clean them seems to really matter too. And a lot of people will use water or use parlour wash to clean their collection and feeding equipment, but this does mean you've got a pretty good chance of having quite high bacterial contamination. So instead of using parlour wash or water, actually using peracetic acid or hypochlorite to clean collection and feeding equipment means you have much lower bacterial levels. We also found using pre-milking teat disinfectant was well worthwhile doing. So in general, your colostrum collection plan should be clean the teat with a pre-milking teat disinfection, and clean your collection and feeding equipment every time you use them with scalding hot water rather than cold water, and use peracetic acid and hypochlorite or hypochlorite rather than water or parlour wash. There wasn't many farms on the trial using a pasteurizer, but when they did use them, they were really effective actually at reducing bacterial levels. So to kind of summarise on colostrum, colostrum is really important for calf health, and we know that. Quantity should be kind of 3 to 4 litres, which is about 8.5% body weight, so you might choose to vary it slightly depending on the size of the calf. It really needs to be fed as quickly as possible to allow that immunity to be taken by the calf, and it really shouldn't ever be longer than 6 hours after birth. Colostrum can be tested for quality, and calf bloods can be taken with your vet to determine whether those calves are receiving enough immunity on your farm in general. Providing clean colostrum is really important as well, and our research would suggest that using scalding hot water rather than cold water, and using either hypochlorite or peracetic acid rather than water or parlour wash makes a pretty big difference here. So on dairy farms, we're really excellent at collecting clean milk for human consumption, so that same level of care really needs to go into colostrum collection. And the calf has absolutely no immunity at all at birth, so it's just as important that colostrum collection equipment is as clean as possible. So AHDB have got a really nice colostrum hygiene video on YouTube, and that really is well worth a watch just to make sure that you're doing everything correctly.
Thanks, Bobby. We've had a few more questions come in. The first one is for John and Anna. So John and Anna, you're achieving a very small to zero bacterial count in your colostrum. So what do you do, and how are you stopping getting that bacteria in your colostrum?
Well, the cow comes, we always have the fresh calvers in at the beginning of milking so that everything's clean in the parlour anyway when they first come in. The cow is, we use the udder brushes, and so the cow is treated just like we would milk the main herd, so they're pre-cleaned before milking. We only have one dump bucket for fresh calvers. It doesn't do any other throwaway cows. We have different ones for mastitis, etc. So that bucket is only for colostrum. They're sterilised every milking as well, and between cows as well, we suck peracetic acid water through them. We just have a bucket in the pit, we just suck a bit of water through. Then the milk is taken straight out of the parlour in clean buckets again and stored.
Brilliant, thanks, John. It sounds like a rigorous protocol, but obviously works really well. Robert, what is the best way of storing colostrum?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are a couple of main ways people do it. Typically, you can keep colostrum chilled as long as it's chilled quite quickly to fridge temperatures. Then that can be quite an effective method and can be stored for several days like that if you need to. Probably more commonly, people will freeze colostrum, and there's lots of different systems. But the system's actually where you've got just a single bag for a calf. That bag, once it's collected, it gets frozen, and then all you need to do is take it out and defrost it and feed it straight to the calf. Can be really quite effective. So as long as you get your freezing and your defrosting right according to the machinery manufacturer, the defrosting guidelines, then actually that's a perfectly adequate way of collecting, storing, and feeding colostrum. Can be quite nice in the middle of the night just to pull a bag out, know that it's of good quality because you've tested it before. And it's frozen and it's ready to go, and you just defrost it and feed to the calf. Can save you having to collect and test colostrum kind of there and then, maybe when you've got other things you might prefer to be doing.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had a question about pasteurisation of colostrum and if it affects the quality of that colostrum.
Really good question, and a really common question. No, not very much at all. So there's quite a lot of good tests actually and good studies on colostrum pasteurisation. It's hot enough to kill bacteria, but it's not hot enough to destroy any of the immunity, which is largely immunoglobulins, so proteins within that colostrum. It doesn't get hot enough to destroy those. So it will get rid of an enormous number of the bacteria, but it doesn't affect the immunity. And there's lots of nice studies out now showing that actually if you do pasteurize, then the calf can receive actually a lot more immunity into their blood, which is kind of where we're going from here. You don't have to have a pasteurizer to do colostrum management well. John and Anna don't use a pasteurizer, and they've got really low bacterial levels as it is. But it certainly can help if you're really struggling to get your bacterial levels. The thing I'd say is probably just test the calves' blood, do 10 or 12 calves and see what the management's like on your farm. If everything's brilliant, then maybe you don't need to change something. But actually, if you've got some calves that aren't getting enough immunity, then maybe looking at an investment such as a pasteurizer might be a way to go amongst the other things that we've talked about already.
Brilliant, thank you. We have another question here around the washing of the equipment in hypo or parasitic acid. Does this need to be extended to buckets and tubes for administering colostrum, or just the buckets that you carry the milk or the colostrum over to the pens?
Really, the more the better. So everything that colostrum comes into contact with is basically a risk for bacteria. And as we know, milk, colostrum, whatever it is going through pipes and that kind of thing, they do build up over time. What we really know is you cannot tell how clean a bit of equipment is by looking at it. And there's actually been scientific studies on that where people have looked and said, well, that looks pretty clean to me. They test it and things really aren't that clean. So colostrum coming out of the cow is really low in bacteria. If you then put it into a bucket, that could pick up bacteria there. If you then put it through a feeding tube, then it could pick up bacteria there. So for me, really, it's every single bit of equipment that colostrum is going to come into contact with needs to be cleaned in a similar way. So hot water, parasitic acid or hypochlorite, and really keep things as if you were collecting milk or going to be feeding it to people. Really, we need to be really clean with this colostrum collection and feeding.
Brilliant. Okay, we'll take one more question for this portion. And the question is, if the colostrum isn't good enough, what would be the best alternative?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one, isn't it? And I suppose is sometimes people use as an argument not to test, because if that's all the colostrum you've got, then that's all you've got. I suppose really the testing and storing of colostrum allows you to kind of have a little bit of a bank in reserve. So if you've got a couple of cows maybe that are producing quite a lot of colostrum, more than you need maybe for each calf, and of high quality as well, freezing bags of colostrum allows you to kind of have a little bit of a bank in stock. So if you then do have a cow with a lower level of immunity in the colostrum, you can say, okay, well, maybe we just won't feed this at all. Let's use one of our stock frozen bags. You can use powdered colostrum as well. Probably not quite as good as its own mother's fresh colostrum, but they're really not too far off these days actually. So having some powdered colostrum in stock, is really a must. So if you find you've got really poor quality colostrum in a cow and you don't have any others in stock, reaching for that powdered colostrum really, is no problem at all. And the calf will most likely do very well off that.
Thanks, Robert. This question is actually very closely linked, so I think we will ask it now. And does freezing affect the quality of the colostrum?
It shouldn't do very much. So again, as you'd expect, there's quite a lot of studies in this area, and really it shouldn't affect the quality very much at all. If it does affect it, it's going to be a really tiny amount, and probably nothing that's going to affect the calf. So freezing, as long as it's done quickly and the collection's been clean and you defrost it at an appropriate speed and temperature, then really it's an absolutely acceptable way to feed colostrum, and you shouldn't see any decrease in quality that you'll notice on farm.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll move on.
Okay, so on to daily live weight gain. So achieving a good kind of growth rate in our pre-weaning animals is really important for a few reasons, really. I suppose firstly in terms of farm economics for both beef and dairy animals on dairy farms, but it can also impact the first lactation yield in dairy heifers. So we'll not break with tradition. John and Anna, if I can hand over to you to give us a little brief overview of your current weighing strategy and maybe why daily live weight gain might be useful or important to you in your pre-weaning calves?
Yeah, okay. Well, we only used to weigh them when we dosed them until this trial, and we started weighing them with the calf tape, the belly tape. And Anna weighs everything at when it comes off the cow at birth, and then again at weaning. And we calve all our heifers in between 22 and 24 months, so we've got to have a growth rate of 0.8 kilos a day to get them to the weight we want them at to enter the herd. We do all that off basically cake and straw and grass when they're out at in the summer, and obviously silage in the second winter of their lives. That's about it, really.
Yeah, that's great, John. Thank you. So looking at kind of daily live weight gains across the trial and kind of why we'd be interested in that. I mean, yeah, John raised a good point. Kind of getting those heifers to kind of 22 to 24 months is quite a difficult job, and it's also very expensive as well. You know, rearing a heifer costs about around about £2,000. So the more efficient we can be with that rearing process, that the better it is for farm profitability. And there is quite good evidence as well that a really good pre-weaning growth rate can improve the performance of heifers in their first lactation as well. So, alongside the importance of good growth rates for dairy heifers, we've also got benefits for beef cross calves as well from dairies, which is also important to look at too. So looking at growth rates between birth and weaning across all farms in the study, you can see there's quite a bit of variation between different farms. So this graph here shows the average growth rate for each farm on the trial as a line in the middle, and then you've got the top and the bottom 25% of calves for each farm shown by the top and the bottom of each one of those boxes. So of course we want the average growth rate to be really nice and high, but we also want to see quite a nice small box, which means that all calves are consistently growing well, and it's not just a few calves that grow amazingly and a few calves that grow really poorly. So if we look at John and Anna's results specifically, we can immediately see some trends. So it seems that kind of female calves generally have slightly higher growth rates than the male calves, and this seems fairly consistent over time. There seems to be a bit of a difference between breeds as well on this right-hand graph here. And we can see that actually the female dairy heifers seem to be performing the best out of any of the groups. So it's pretty interesting to kind of monitor these growth rates over time, and you can start to pick apart interesting patterns that are present on your farm over different times of the year. You can monitor growth rates and create graphs just like this on the Nottingham Herd Health Toolkit app, where you basically download a template, upload your weights that you've recorded, and you can kind of draw graphs like this. Really. So from the trial with 60 farms, what are kind of the key things that you can do to improve your growth rate? So looking at all of the farms on the trial, and each dot on these graphs is a farm, there's some really nice patterns here. Now, this first graph on the left shows the amount of milk being fed along the bottom against the average growth rate for each farm going up the side. And maybe we didn't need a research project to tell us basically if you feed more milk, you're going to get better growth rates, but it's nice to see that it came through as quite an important factor in the study. It's also worth remembering that when the calves are with their mother, they'll probably drink 10 to 12 litres per day. So it's really worth thinking about from a welfare perspective, how hungry calves might get if they're fed a lot below this level. The graph on the right here shows the impact of temperature. So this is from our data loggers in each of the calf buildings on the trial. And you can see actually the calves in warmer buildings within the first month of life grew a lot faster than those in colder buildings. And really these two graphs together kind of illustrate the concept of energy in, energy out. So the calves being provided more energy in through their milk, and those having to spend less energy out on staying warm will have a lot more energy available to grow. So alongside these factors, we've also found a really nice strong association of growth rates with hygiene. So there's two graphs here, and they show really similar patterns and really relate to the effect of hygiene on daily live weight gain. So this graph on the left shows the effect of the calf pen clean out rate, so the number of days between each calf pen clear out. On the right, we can see the effect of the calving pen clean out rate. And really they both show the same thing. Farms that clean out more frequently have much better growth rates. And every single one of the top 5 farms for growth rates cleaned out both their calving pen and calf pens at least monthly. So this is possibly due to an increase in disease. And this next graph will show the growth rates of all animals on the trial by whether they had scour, pneumonia, or had no disease at all. And it's quite clear, you can see here, that animals that don't ever get scour or pneumonia clearly grow a lot better than animals that do get scour or pneumonia on the whole. So to summarise daily live weight gain on the whole, achieving a great daily live weight gain is quite important in the pre-weaning period in terms of farm profitability, and can also have a positive impact on first lactation performance. Kind of the most important areas that we've identified in this trial is feeding a higher volume of milk, so at least 6 to 8 litres per day. We also identified actually that rapid colostrum feeding is really important in having good growth rates as well. We know colder temperatures in the calf sheds are associated with lower growth rates. So creating some mini shelters or areas where the calves can tuck themselves away and be a bit warmer, and having lots and lots of fresh dry bedding is really important, as we kind of previously discussed. Hygiene seems to be really important as well. So on the whole, farms that cleaned out their calves every 30 days or more and cleaned out the calving pen at least every 21 days had far better growth rates than those that were cleaning out less frequently. You can monitor growth rates with your own vet, or if you want to use the Nottingham Herd Health Toolkit, you can create pretty similar graphs that I've shown previously.
Thanks, Bobby. We have a couple of questions come in. The first one is, how much weight does 1 centimetre equate to on a weigh tape?
That's a good question. I probably don't have an answer to that off the top of my head, and it might depend on the weigh tape a little bit as well. Yeah, I'm not sure, but normally they come with the centimetres on one side and the weight on the other side. But yeah, I can look that up and get back to you if you want.
Thank you. There's a question here about the impact of scours on profit.
Yeah, that's they definitely will is the easy answer to that. Yeah, I mean, it's probably in the region of about kind of 40 to 80 pounds per case of scour. And of course, you've got all the cost of treating that animal. You've got, the time spent treating that animal. Farmers' time is definitely not free, and you could be spending that time doing other useful things as well. And all these little things. And then of course, every now and then you'll unfortunately get an animal that will die as a result of it. So all of these things get factored in. So whilst you might think, oh, I've only spent a fiver on electrolytes or whatever it might be, actually those costs really spiral. And as you saw from the previous graphs, actually it's probably the effect on their growth rates that really hits them. So that will really knock them back. Pneumonia similarly is really very costly and actually probably hits them a bit harder than scour in terms of growth rates and performance. Once they get things like pneumonia, they can have this lung damage and this scarring sometimes for the rest of their lives, which really can knock their performance when they become heifers, in their first lactation.
Yeah, thank you. There's a sort of a group of questions that have come in all around the milk literage to be fed to calves. The first one is, how soon can a calf manage to drink 8 litres per day? Is this realistic from birth?
It'd probably be difficult, I think, to get 8 litres into them from birth, so it is something you kind of have to taper up. But certainly by kind of 2 or 3 weeks, and really this depends on the calf, the genetics, the breed, that kind of thing. But certainly getting them onto kind of 5 or 6 litres as fast as you can, and then tapering that up to kind of 8 litres within a few weeks, absolutely possible. And there's loads of guys on the trial that are doing exactly that, and get them up to 8 litres basically as soon as they can take it. And for me, it's really as much as that calf will drink. So you can just offer them a little bit more, and if they don't drink it, then fine, you've not lost very much. If they don't drink that extra, half a pint at the end of the feeding, but try and get them onto a really nice high level of milk feeding as quickly as possible. Really, is probably the best thing for their growth, but also to give them kind of energy to fight disease as well.
Yeah, brilliant. The next question to do with that is around different calf sizes and whether you think a Jersey calf could be drinking that amount of milk.
No, yeah, that's a good point. I didn't mention that, but clearly there's differences between breeds. So no, you know, you've got to look at the individual calf. Jersey calves, probably some Jersey calves will drink up to 8 litres, others won't get that far. Again, it's pretty much allowing them the choice, and you'll know for your breed, whatever breed you might have, allowing them to drink as much as they want to is probably the best place for them to go to. Economically, you'll have to kind of work out you know the maths for each farm and whatever it is you're feeding, what type of powder or liquid milk or whatever. But yeah, try and feed as much as you can, I suppose, is the message really, and that will vary between breeds. Yeah, that's a good point.
Brilliant. Another question here around feeding that amount of milk. Will that start to reduce dry feed intake?
Yeah, people often worry about that, and yeah, it might do initially, but I suppose the aim of the game here is to get those calves to a healthy first lactation animal. Calves to begin with are basically a monogastric, so they're like, you know, like humans or pigs or whatever. You know, they've not got an established rumen, so we want them to get onto hard feed reasonably quickly. But to begin with, the most efficient way to get energy and to get you know, all the nutrients they need is through milk. So there is always a worry. People often raise that, and I wouldn't see it as a particular worry in terms of getting good growth rates pre-weaning. And certainly from the research, you know, that's not what we're seeing at all. We're seeing basically people feeding more milk have better growth rates and ultimately have you know, healthier calves on the whole. You know, we're not talking about the differences here, I suppose, between you know, 2 litres and 10 litres. Most people are kind of on 4, 5 or 6 already, so it's really just about trying slightly increasing, and maybe if you're on 5 litres, you know, doing the maths, working out if it's economically worthwhile and trying 6 litres and seeing if that has an effect. As always, it's just monitor the end result. You know, what you're interested in here is getting a good growth rate, so you can only really tell that by getting getting a birth weight and a weaning weight, working out some daily live weight gains, then maybe try increasing the milk by 1 litre a day and seeing what that effect has. If there's no effect at all, then, you know, maybe it's not for you. If you do see a bump in daily live weight gains, then you know, it kind of shows you that it's working. So it's really just monitor it on your farm and see what works for you.
Brilliant, thank you. And the last question we'll take just for now is that this person's calves stay in the same pen until weaning. Is it worth starting to muck them out every 30 days to improve hygiene? Yeah,
that's a really good question and really common actually in our trial. There was lots of people doing exactly that, so it's kind of a once per batch. The unfortunate answer is probably yes, it is worth doing that. So logistically, it's a bit of a pain, isn't it? You've got to take your calves out of that pen, hold them somewhere, clean the pen out. But yes, it probably is worth doing that. From our research, you know, about every 30 days as a cutoff seemed to be most effective in terms of getting good growth rates and reducing disease and so on as well. So, you know, as often as possible, really, get that muck out and you know, do a full clean out and make sure plenty of fresh, clean, dry bedding goes in. So, you know, bed them so you can't see their legs when they're lying down, and that will probably have the best outcomes. Unfortunately, it is an extra job, so it's whether it takes priority over other things.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll move on.
Okay, so one of the outcomes that we've kind of had of this project is that every farm that's participated in the trial has received a calf health plan, and that's kind of based on the research findings that we've had from the 60 farms. And this health plan really isn't about having this enormous list of things that you absolutely must do. Instead, what it kind of aims to do is you to pick the easiest changes that are going to make the biggest impact to the calves. You know, realizing that the people don't have unlimited time or money to put, you know, hundreds of different interventions into place. So John and Anna have received a health plan. So what I'll do now, I think if I hand over to yourselves, John and Anna, I don't know if you've got maybe some key areas from the health plan or in general in terms of calf performance. What are the kind of key areas for you that might be simple changes that would have the biggest impact for you?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, looking at all the stuff that you gave us, I think that the key things we brought out is certainly not to overstock sheds. That seems to have a big impact for us, and I think probably everyone would find that. We don't mix the age of calves, so young calves aren't in the same airspace as older calves. I think that again is also important. Just general attention to detail, and probably one of the most important things is having a dedicated calf area, which is Anna. I'm sure she does a much better job than I ever could do anyway, but just being dedicated to that job. We use jackets here in the winter. I think perhaps we take them off perhaps a little bit too soon, looking at the data that the temperatures take till July to warm up. It might be that we leave them on longer. And the other thing we've been suggested is that we feed more milk. We had a discussion about this, about the economics of it, but you've convinced me that's there, so we're going to try that. And jackets, we clean the jackets thoroughly between each calf.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. And it's so important, isn't it, to get those jackets so clean and dry. I'm glad I've managed to persuade you on the milk. I'll count that as a victory. And yeah, it'd be really interesting way to kind of monitor this going forward. So we've got about two years worth now, haven't we, of good calf weight. So we can see in the coming year if feeding an extra 1 litre of milk a day. So I think you're on 5 litres before, John, going up to 6 litres. See if that does make any difference. It might not, in which case we can easily change things back. But we can see if it does have a useful impact in terms of growth rates, in terms of disease outcomes, and so on. Yeah, and really good point as well about not mixing kind of pre-weaned animals and older animals. That that was something in the trial. It wasn't that commonly done, but people that have kind of 4, 5, 6 month old animals mixing with very young animals, it's a really big risk for pneumonia. Unfortunately, as part of the calf health plan, we can't have Anna as one of the outcomes. She's a bit of a secret weapon there. So that's something, unfortunately, will only be useful on your farm. But yeah, I wish we could drop Anna onto most calf rearing facilities. Would be a useful thing. So I'll kind of finish off now just with a quick summary of kind of what we've been through in terms of the research, really, just to kind of round off, really. So housing in general, it's really got to protect calves from the environment, and we know in Britain from all this research that really it's too cold for young calves for actually most of the year. So we can't improve the weather that we've got, but what we can do is make sure we've got loads and loads of clean, dry straw, and bedding to a height where you actually can't see the calves' legs when they're lying down, even if that's just for part of the shed. Ventilation is still really, really important to prevent pneumonia, but we don't want to have a gale blowing directly on the calves. So considering having some kind of mini shelters within the calf sheds that you can easily make yourself, and kind of watch the calves, and if they're using an area a lot, then it probably means that they quite like it in terms of the environment. Housing really needs to be cleaned out completely as regularly as you can. We found as part of the trial, then calving pens should be cleaned out at least every 3 weeks, and calf pens should be cleaned out at least monthly. And it's really worth monitoring kind of this environment within your shed. So, as we said before, a simple minimum maximum thermometer kind of immediately lets you know how cold the shed might get overnight, and then maybe even in the hot summer months how hot it might get, particularly in systems like hutches where the temperature can get really quite hot. It often does get colder than we think overnight in calf sheds, and just remember that the environment for young calves wants to be about 15 degrees or above for the first few weeks of life. We talked a bit about colostrum and how much that sets up calves for life, and they have absolutely zero immunity without any colostrum. So 3 to 4 litres being fed as quickly as possible, and never more than 6 hours after birth. It's got to be of good quality and of good cleanliness. So when you're collecting a colostrum, just make sure your equipment is cleaned with scalding hot water and either hypochlorite or peracetic acid every time it's used. And you can really easily monitor whether colostrum management is working by taking some calf blood samples with your vet, and just see whether that immunity actually is being transferred to the calves. Colostrum can be really easily tested for both bacteria levels and also immunity levels as well. Talked a bit about pre-weaning growth rates, and they're really important for kind of efficient rearing both of beef calves and of dairy calves. So making sure calves are fed kind of at least 6 litres a day really can improve growth rates and potentially reduce health issues as well. We know calves are too cold most of the year round, and colder temperatures seem to be associated with reduced growth rates and also increased mortality as well. So making sure you've got plenty of straw, clean out the sheds regularly, and really limit the effects of that negative temperature as we've discussed. Again, it's really important to monitor these things going forward. So you can either do so with your vet or you can use the Nottingham Herd Health Toolkit as well to monitor your growth rates going forward. So that's kind of a bit of a summary there. So I'll finish by just thanking all of the farmers that participated as part of the research project. You know, this research really doesn't go ahead without farmer input at all. We've had a really great response from farmers, some really fantastic data, and in particular, actually, thanks to John and Anna for also being so open and willing to share their results and thoughts so that everyone can benefit.
Thank you very much, Robert. That was brilliant and a brilliant presentation. We've had so many questions come in, which is fantastic. So I'm going to start with those. So I'm hoping that both John and Anna and Robert will be able to come back onto video so you can see us all to wrap up. So first off, Bobby, the first question is, can we test for ammonia easily? More straw we use, even the frequent cleaning, we get ammonia in our hutches. How could we ventilate our hutches, or should we be using a different bedding?
Yeah, in answer to the first part of that, it's quite difficult to monitor ammonia levels, and the kit's not super cheap. It was something actually we wanted to monitor as part of the trial, but having to have 60 ammonia monitors would just be way too expensive. So it's quite difficult to monitor really. In general, the clean out rate usually is fairly linked with ammonia levels. So if you can get all of that dirty bedding out and put clean dry bedding back on again, with hutch systems, you know, having a nice hard standing base makes that so much easier. And really it's quite difficult to ventilate hutches any more than they already are. Some people do try putting holes and things in, opening vents up at the back and that sort of thing. We've got to be a little bit cautious because, of course, the more we open things up, the colder they get as well. So actually, I mean, you can consider putting things like verandas over the top of hutches, and then you can have them as open as you like, but with a good amount of protection from the elements as well. Also, a nice bonus with any kind of veranda or roof covering is that it's much nicer for us to work in as well. You know, working with hutches on a cold, wet day is not very pleasant for anyone, calves or people, really.
Perfect, thank you. The next question is, for a New Zealand grazing system, what do you think is the best way of housing?
Yeah, pretty tricky, really, and there's quite often with any kind of block calving herd, then it's quite hard to kind of have a large number of calves at one time of the year, really. So it's having flexible housing, really. I mean, there's lots of flexible housing options about now. Lots of different companies doing kind of pod-based housing systems as well. I quite like kind of igloo or hutch-based systems under a veranda as well. Can be quite a nice, quick system where you can put loads of calves very quickly, and then when you don't need them, they're kind of out of the way as well. So there's no perfect housing system. You know, it's absolutely how you manage it. And if you've got lots of calves dropping at one time, then it really makes it even more important that those calf pens are cleaned out at least every month, and you have absolutely loads of clean, dry straw going in all the time, really.
Brilliant, thank you. Should we be testing every cow's colostrum?
Yeah, good question. I suppose there's only really ever any point in testing things if it's going to change one of our decisions, really. So if you're just testing and not doing anything with that information, then there's definitely no point in doing it at all. If you're testing it at a herd level, at least we can get a bit of a picture. If you do kind of 10 or 20, we've got a bit of an idea of how things are for the herd. It is absolutely worth doing it for every single sample if you're going to change your decision there. So whether you're deciding then, right, well, am I going to feed this colostrum or bin it if you've got the supply, or am I thinking, am I going to freeze this colostrum because it's such good quality? Then it's definitely worth testing. The refractometer is really nice because it's so cheap, it's so quick. You just put a drop onto it and have a look and see what that immunity level is like. And then you can also use that same bit of kit in conjunction with your vet to look at the calf blood itself and see what level of immunity is in the blood as well. So you can look at both the quality of the colostrum and how much immunity actually gets into the calf's blood, which is kind of the final proof that things are working, really.
Brilliant, thank you. Can you increase the quality of the colostrum by what you feed the cow?
Yeah, that's a tricky answer. It's really hard to do it, and lots of people have tried lots of things. Yeah, you probably can ultimately, but you know, it's such a massive changes to do to kind of your dry cow action and things like that, and you know, have consequences in other areas as well. So I would tend to kind of slightly step back, I suppose, if that is an issue for your farm. Actually changing the immunity levels in the colostrum is really quite difficult to do by feeding, and actually probably it's much easier to look at things like, you know, your speed of feeding, the volume of feeding, making sure it's really clean, and just trying to bank that really good colostrum, and making sure that you feed as much of the better colostrum than you do of the poorer colostrum.
Okay, brilliant. Thoughts on the research suggesting that feeding more than 4 litres to dairy heifers can potentially lead to metabolic problems later in life?
Yeah, so I would say that probably the benefits will far outweigh any risk. I don't think there will be very much risks in terms of metabolic issues going on later in life. I think there's definitely some big downsides to only feeding 4 litres a day, one of which is calf welfare as well. You know, considering these animals will you know, really kind of evolve to drink 10 to 12 litres in lots and lots of little feeds per day. Only feeding kind of, you know, 4 litres, it seems very light really, and in terms of energy requirements won't get you anywhere near 0.8 kilos a day. If you want to look at kind of what levels you need to feed with different amounts of powder and so on the Nottingham Herd Health Toolkit, there's a powder calculator, so you can look on there, you can put in the specifications for your powder and just see how many litres do you need to feed if you want to hit a certain growth rate. And you know, you really won't get anywhere near it with feeding 4 litres. So yeah, I wouldn't be worried about kind of metabolic issues going forward, and I definitely would be worried if you don't feed enough in the pre-weaning period of having issues then.
Okay, brilliant. Do you have any data on growth rates and age at putting calves on once a day feeding?
No, I don't think there is any data to my knowledge that say exactly when the best period to do that would be. My general feeling is it's probably not a very good idea to do. Again, coming back to, you know, a lot of these things come back to trying to do as natural a job for the calf as possible, really. So calf should, you know, with its mother, will feed little and often throughout the day and have 10 to 12 litres. Once a day feeding, you know, and people will say it's okay because it's, you know, it's really high concentration and it keeps them full for ages, but 24 hours between feeds is a difficult thing for a young calf to do. So I wouldn't suggest once a day feeding, certainly for the pre-weaning period. I don't think there's any good science to back up once a day feeding, really. So for me, and certainly from the research, it seems to suggest that the more frequent feeding, the better. And so really that's either twice a day feeding or some sort of automatic feeder or ad lib system, so that the calves have the choice of feeding when they want to feed.
Perfect. Would you recommend cleaning calving pens in between every cow calving?
Yes, but only because I don't have to do it myself. So yeah, I mean, really with cleaning, it's do it as often as is possible. You can't really do it too often. But by the same token, you know, it is an extra job. So it depends on your system. Some systems have, you know, an individual calving pen where they can very easily just strip out that calving pen and it's back to, you know, whatever it is underneath, rubber matting and things like that. Other places much more challenging to do. So, you know, as long as it's every 3 weeks at least, then that seems to be a good cut-off point. If you can do it more frequently, then definitely worth doing. Some people do worry about, you know, cows losing their footing and so on. So if you're scraping it back to bare concrete, just make sure you've got enough of a bedding pack there so they won't be slipping about as well.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got time for 1 or 2 more. How can I test colostrum bacteria levels?
So that would be done through a laboratory. So probably the easiest way is to have a conversation with your vet, and they'll be able to do that for you. So we used QMMS lab, and they basically send out a kit with several pots. They get put on ice put back in the box and sent back into the lab so that they can test them. It's quite a straightforward process, I think. John and Anna, did you find it was an okay process taking colostrum samples and sending in?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Yeah, so quite straightforward to do. I think it costs around about £100-ish. So it's not very cheap to do, but if you think you've got issues with colostrum bacteria levels, then certainly worth thinking about. And if it changes something at a herd level, then it's definitely worth thinking about.
Brilliant, thank you. One last question. What level on the refractometer should we be looking if using for a blood test?
For blood tests, about 8.4% on the for blood tests. For colostrum, then about 22% and above would be really good. So if it's slightly below that, then it's probably in this kind of okay. So kind of 18 to 22% for colostrum, and kind of about 7.8, 8.4 in that window is kind of okay for calf blood. But any lower than that, and that really implies that you've got problems really. So if you're testing colostrum, then below 18%, really that's very, very weak in terms of immunity levels. And if it's kind of below 7.8% on blood, then that's probably very low as well. There are different ways you can look at calf blood as well. So with your vet, they might choose to do ZST testing or total protein testing, which is very, very similar. It just gives you a slightly different reading. So talk to your vet, get some blood tests done. They're really simple to do, and they give you a lot of information about your colostrum management and how that's working for you.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Robert. I'm really sorry to anyone that has had a question that we haven't been able to answer today, but we are going to run out of time. We will send a summary email after this webinar to all attendees with a list of all the questions asked and answers to all of those questions. And we do have a calf management resource with AHDB, which I will also link in the email, which you can find a lot of the answers to the questions that have been asked today and in more detail. I've just got a few things that I want to summarise with. These Welsh strategic dairy farms are jointly delivered with Farming Connect. I would just like to bring your attention to the animal health clinics that Farming Connect do have available that you can access as a Welsh dairy farmer. There is funding for sample testing and one-on-one advice with your vets. And please just contact either your local area rep or Farming Connect if you would like to take advantage of any of these. The local reps are Rhys Davies, Simon Pitt and Gwynan Evans. They also have one-to-one surgeries with a range of advice that you can access, from legal to nutrition to staff management. So again, please just contact your technical officer if you would like to talk about any of these things in more detail. What's next with AHDB? There will be a follow-up email, as I've already mentioned, to this webinar. We also have upcoming events. The next Welsh Strategic Dairy Farm event is with Penlech Bark, Matthew Jackson, and that launch webinar will be on the 30th of September at the same time as today, 1 p.m. We also have another calf health webinar coming up on the 6th of October, and that will be available to register on the AHDB website in due course. As a summary to this webinar, I think calf health is all about attention to detail and how you manage the resources that you have. And I think that's been very clearly identified by Bobby and John and Anna today. And I would really like to thank you both for all of your time in putting this webinar together. It's really fantastic to have John and Anna on board as our strategic dairy farmers and technical experts like Robert Hyde yourself to come on board and talk to us all today. So that's the webinar for today. I'd like to say diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.